The year was 1962. The world watched as two superpowers stood on the brink of nuclear war. This was the Cuban Missile Crisis, a 13-day standoff. The fate of the world hung in the balance. At the heart of this crisis lay Cuba, just 90 miles off Florida. Under Fidel Castro, Cuba had become a communist state. The Soviet Union deployed nuclear missiles to Cuba. The discovery of these missiles sparked a chain of events. President Kennedy faced an unprecedented challenge. The world held its breath, wondering if cooler heads would prevail. The Cuban Missile Crisis was a defining moment in the Cold War. It is a story of brinkmanship and diplomacy. It holds valuable lessons for us today. To understand the Cuban Missile Crisis, one must first delve into the icy depths of the Cold War. Following World War II, the United States and the Soviet Union emerged as the world's two superpowers. However, their alliance against Nazi Germany quickly dissolved, replaced by an ideological struggle that would define a generation. The United States, championing democracy and capitalism, found itself locked in a global confrontation with the Soviet Union, which advocated for communism. This rivalry, fueled by mutual suspicion and fear, played out on multiple fronts: political, economic, and military. It was a clash of ideologies, a battle for hearts and minds, with each superpower vying for global dominance. The Cold War was not a hot war, at least not in the traditional sense. There were no direct military confrontations between the two superpowers. Instead, it was a war of proxy conflicts, espionage, and propaganda. The threat of nuclear war loomed large, casting a long shadow over the world. Both sides amassed vast nuclear arsenals, capable of unimaginable destruction. The doctrine of mutually assured destruction, or MAD, emerged, a chilling concept where each side recognized that any nuclear attack would be met with an equally devastating retaliation. The Cuban Missile Crisis brought the world face to face with the terrifying reality of this doctrine. In the midst of this global standoff, a revolution was brewing in the Caribbean. In 1959, Fidel Castro, a charismatic revolutionary leader, overthrew the US-backed government of Fulgencio Batista in Cuba. Castro's communist leanings quickly became apparent, and he aligned Cuba with the Soviet Union, establishing a communist foothold in the Western Hemisphere. The United States, alarmed by this development, viewed Castro's Cuba as a threat to its national security. The failed Bay of Pigs invasion in 1961, a botched attempt by the CIA to overthrow Castro, only served to further sour relations between the two countries. The invasion pushed Cuba closer into the Soviet embrace, setting the stage for a confrontation that would push the world to the brink. The Bay of Pigs fiasco was a major embarrassment for the Kennedy administration. It also fueled Castro's paranoia, convincing him that the United States was intent on removing him from power. This belief, coupled with the constant threat of American military action, made Cuba receptive to Soviet overtures of protection. In the spring of 1962, Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev conceived of a daring plan to alter the balance of power. Khrushchev believed that placing Soviet nuclear missiles in Cuba would deter any future US attempts to invade the island. It was a risky gamble, a provocation that he calculated would enhance Soviet security and prestige. Khrushchev's decision was also driven by a desire to level the playing field. The United States had already deployed nuclear missiles in Turkey and Italy, within striking distance of Soviet territory. Khrushchev saw the placement of Soviet missiles in Cuba as a justifiable response to this perceived American advantage. The Soviet operation, shrouded in secrecy, commenced in the summer of 1962. Soviet ships, loaded with missiles and other military equipment, began arriving in Cuban ports. Construction of missile sites, camouflaged from aerial surveillance, progressed rapidly. The stage was set for a confrontation that would test the nerves of both superpowers. On October 14, 1962, a US U-2 reconnaissance plane flying over Cuba captured photographic evidence of Soviet missile sites under construction. The discovery sent shockwaves through the American intelligence community and the White House. President Kennedy, faced with an unprecedented threat to national security, convened a group of advisors to chart a course of action. The world watched with bated breath as the crisis unfolded. Kennedy, in a televised address to the nation on October 22nd, announced a naval blockade of Cuba to prevent further Soviet shipments. He demanded the removal of the existing missiles and warned of dire consequences if the Soviets did not comply. The following days were a tense dance on the edge of a nuclear precipice. Soviet ships, some carrying missile components, steamed towards Cuba, while the US Navy prepared to intercept them. The world held its breath, fearing that a single miscalculation, a single spark, could ignite a global conflagration. As tensions reached a fever pitch, secret negotiations between the United States and the Soviet Union offered a glimmer of hope. Kennedy and Khrushchev, communicating through back channels, recognized the need for a peaceful resolution. Both leaders understood the stakes, the terrifying consequences of a nuclear exchange. On October 28th, Khrushchev agreed to dismantle the Cuban missile sites in exchange for a US pledge not to invade Cuba. Secretly, the United States also agreed to remove its Jupiter missiles from Turkey, a concession that was not publicly revealed at the time. The crisis was over. The world breathed a collective sigh of relief. The Cuban Missile Crisis had a profound impact on both superpowers. It underscored the dangers of brinkmanship, the terrifying ease with which a miscalculation or miscommunication could lead to nuclear war. It also highlighted the importance of diplomacy, the need for clear and open communication channels between adversaries. The Cuban Missile Crisis, though a distant memory, still holds valuable lessons for us today. It reminds us of the fragility of peace, the ever-present threat of nuclear war. It underscores the importance of diplomacy, strategic patience, and the need for clear communication in resolving international conflicts. The crisis also serves as a stark reminder of the catastrophic consequences of nuclear war. The potential for mass destruction, the unimaginable suffering that would result from a nuclear exchange, should be a sobering thought for all nations. As we navigate a world still grappling with the proliferation of nuclear weapons, the lessons of the Cuban Missile Crisis are more relevant than ever. The need for dialogue, for understanding, for cooperation in reducing nuclear arsenals and preventing the spread of these deadly weapons cannot be overstated. The future of humanity may very well depend on it.